Discovering Kazakhstan is Jonathan Newell's unbiased view on culture and the mode of life of Kazakh people, on amazing landscapes and architectural masterpieces all over Kazakhstan.
Today in Discovering Kazakhstan, we're heading out that way into the sunrise around the Karagandy region to a place called Bukhar Zhyrau. It's named after a person who lived in the 18th century at the time of the great Khans. Well, he was a poet, a writer, and he was also involved in politics, and we're going to find out a little bit more about him today. It's also an opportunity to see the magnificent sunrises in the steppe. It's a long way to go. I had to get up very early this morning. We've had a fantastic opportunity to see this wonderful beauty. An administrative region to the northeast of the city of Karagandy, the sparsely populated county of Bukhar Zhyrau is about the size of Northern Ireland, but with about just 3% of its population. The drive through the steppe to our destination was accompanied by a feeling of the scale of the steppe and the raw beauty of the wilderness. This broad expanse of steppe land, fringed by the gentle slopes on either side, is the birthplace of Bukhar Zhyrau Kalkaman. This is his land. He was born here and he eventually returned to die here. That is his mausoleum. In the intervening period, his life was spent in the footsteps of the great Ablai Khan, travelling all across Kazakhstan. Let's go and have a look at his mausoleum. Our hosts were Ali Khan and Jibek, who look after the museum and mausoleum and who host and guide visitors who come here. These two young men take great pride in their work and had fascinating stories to tell of the man who they respect so much and whose artifacts they look after. Well, this mausoleum is built in the centre of this territory, which is actually a cemetery. And it was built here in 1993, specifically because it's believed that all the people who are interred in this cemetery are part of Bukhar Zhyrau's family, either his family at the time or his descendants since then. But some of these graves date back to the late 18th century, which is about the time that Bukhar Zhyrau himself died. Well, of course, this is a mausoleum, it's not a monument, it's a holy place. And so therefore our friend, our host Ali Khan, has said a prayer while we're in there. And we'll leave the mausoleum behind now and we'll go and look at the museum and get a little bit more about the history of Bukhar Zhyrau. Bukhar Zhyrau lived in an incredibly dynamic period in Kazakhstan's history. In the 18th century, Kazakhstan was at war with the Jungar tribes, and these Batirs, Boganbay Batir and Kabanbay Batir, were great warriors of that period of time. but it was difficult to fight these tribes alone. What Ablai Khan did was to bring together the three different main tribes of Kazakhstan into one single nation. And here, Bukhar Zhyrau wrote some poetry about that event, and it's written in very beautiful language. Essentially, it says that Ablai Khan is a great man for the fact that he was able to bring these three pieces of Kazakhstan together into one united front, against which the Dzungars had no chance of winning. So therefore, he brought victory through unity.
Born close to the end of the 17th century, Bukhar Zhyrau lived in both turbulent and progressive times. He lived to an old age, dying in the 1780s, having spent the final decades of his life as part of Ablai Khan's court, in which he played the roles of both an advisor and entertainer.
Also at that period of time, a little bit later on, it wasn't enough just to have all of these three groups of people together as one nation. They had to have some kind of constitution. And that constitution was brought about by these three men, the leaders of the three tribes, the judges, if you like. This was Joly B, Ayteki B, and Kazakh B. Also, Bukhar Zhyrau played a role in that as well. So by bringing these three people together and creating this constitution, they created real unity within the nation of Kazakhstan. You know, mass communications amongst the people in Kazakhstan is a very, very recent thing. Imagine, this country is absolutely huge. People at one end of the country didn't know what was happening in the other end of the country. So it was a very difficult time. Now, why do we know so much about Bukhar Zhyrau now? Well, it's certainly not through various documents and things like that were passed through the pages of history, as you find in other nations that had a different kind of infrastructure, a different kind of history. It wasn't like that here. Unfortunately, Bukhar Zhyrau didn't have any kind of great marked grave. And this stone, which is unmarked, it doesn't have his name on it, is the only thing that was marking the place where he was interred. Now, the mausoleum that we saw earlier is in the place where this stone was found. So what helped us to get from this as the only kind of memory of Bukhar Zhyrau to what we know today? Well, a lot of that is thanks to one particular man who did a lot of research about him.
Although his father had been a warrior through and through, Bukhar Zhyrau was a man of letters, studying literature, Islam and languages from an early age. He travelled as far afield as Bukhara, in present-day Uzbekistan, to study at a madrasa. He learned the Persian, Arabic and Dzungarian languages.
A lot about what we know of Bukhar Zhyrau is down to this man here. This is Bukhar Zhyrau, and he was a man who, during the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, did a lot of research on this great man. Well, the kind of research he did was he managed to collect all kinds of information, written information about Bukhar Zhyrau, or that Bukhar Zhyrau actually created, that had been distributed to different places around the world. A lot of this material existed in China, Turkey, other places like that, but not here in Kazakhstan. Now, a lot of the history of Kazakhstan is passed on from word of mouth, from generation to generation. Now, when that happens, of course, some of that detail is missed. But here was a great treasure trove of written history of what happened in that great period of the 18th century. And this man here managed to bring all of that back together, back into the Kazakh nation, and create this wonderful picture about Bukhar Zhyrau's life. This man died in 1931, and things continued to move after that period. And on this display here, you can see this man, he was able to popularize the life of Bukhar Zhyrau. He created lots of manuscripts, articles, books, he wrote letters. He created a culture within Kazakhstan that gave the kind of attention that Bukhar Zhyrau deserved. And he was the man who created the idea of making the mausoleum to him. And you can see that Shopanai Amirkhanov, he died in 1993, very shortly after the mausoleum that he was campaigning for was built and erected in that place. So what's the result of all of this? These men, they did all of this work. Well, there's plenty of written material now about Bukhar Zhyrau. We understand him a lot more, we know what he does, and there's all kinds of material. There's this beautiful encyclopedia here about his life, about his work and the things that he did. We know about his poetry, we know about the kind of work that he did, about where he lived, and also the things that he wrote in these beautiful books. This very compact and neat little museum is a great place to come. Come and look at the mausoleum, come and look at the museum, find out a little bit more about Bukhar Zhyrau's life, and leave your own little notes about what you believe and what you think about this place, as many people have done before. It's an amazingly popular little museum, despite the fact that it's a long way from anywhere. Like many former theatres of war around the world, it's very hard to believe that this scenic and peaceful landscape was once the scene of such appalling bloodshed. It's 350 years ago that the Jungar aggressors came to take the Kazakh land. This outcrop of rock that we can see there has witnessed so many things during the centuries. The Jungars, of course, were defeated, and then Bukhar Zhyrau was part of the reconstruction of Kazakhstan once they'd all left the territory. Well, now of course it's all peace and serenity once more, and let's hope that those rock faces there will continue to witness nothing except the sheep and the beauty of the nature around us.
These lands were the venue of the 17th century troubles in which hundreds of warriors were killed in battles between the Kazakhs and the Jungars. These took place before Bukhar Zhyrau was born, although his father had been a brave Kazakh Batir during the conflict.
This very grand monument to Bukhar Zhyrau is a fairly recent addition to the skyline of the nearby town of Botakhara. Well, I think it's a very fitting monument to the man. It's very grand in style, it's got stature, it's at the top of a hill here, and it shows the kind of visage of a man, a great man from the late Middle Ages who had such a big effect on the history of a country. Admirable indeed, I like it. I very strongly believe that the great figures of art, literature and music in the history of a country are very much part of the formation of the structure of that country as it is today. And Kazakhstan, of course, is no exception. Thus, when we look at the history of Bukhar Zhyrau, we're looking at the history of Kazakhstan and how the country has become now. A very great figure. Well, there's more where that came from, and there are more great figures in Kazakhstan's history to explore, as well as the beautiful surroundings where they grew up. So I hope you'll join us again and discover more of this wonderful country with me again in Discovering Kazakhstan. Goodbye.